All right, let's get to some of the questions. I know that we don't have that many people actually here with us live, but that's okay. We're starting off at the beginning. This is the first Patreon live stream, and I didn't necessarily expect lots of people to be here at the same time, but that's the reason why I got you to send in a bunch of your questions at the beginning over the last few days, and I'm going to do my best to try and answer as many of them as possible. I'll keep an eye to see whether or not people join in, and if anyone's actually asking any questions live as well, but we'll get through some of the ones that you already asked first, shall we? So let's just go for it. I hope you're all well, by the way. I'm not really sure what else to say. So let's go with question number one. To clarify, I don't necessarily, and I know this might sound silly, I don't think that I'm always going to get the answers right. Please take my answers with a pinch of salt. This is my opinion on some of this kind of stuff, and I'm willing to be wrong. I am. I don't want to be wrong. Let's not pretend that I like being wrong. However, I am willing to be. So if I find out something in the future that goes against or means that what I've been saying isn't correct, I will, and with as much I'm forgetting the word now, but with as much grace as possible, I will admit that I'm wrong, and I will make sure that I am changing my advice or my practice from then on. That's how medicine should work. It's how science should work. So anyway, let's go on with it. So first question from Lisa was, hey Josh, when did you become interested in food and health, and why? I've seen that you used to be bigger boned, in quotes. Was there a turning point? You seem very passionate about it. Well, I started kind of getting invested in this kind of stuff after graduating medical school, and whilst when I'd started working in A&E. And A&E is, depending on which country you're from, is essentially the emergency department. So it's the place where people come, and it's their first kind of inlet to hospital, essentially. You know what that is. I started working, and I was bigger boned or fat, or, you know, we don't have to be afraid of that word. I had more fat on my body than I do now. And I started feeling hypocritical. Now, it's difficult because my opinion about what being fat is and its relationship to health and all this kind of stuff is different now to what it was, you know, 3-4 years ago when I first started this stuff. But I'll tell you where I was at. I started feeling like I started feeling like a hypocrite, that I was seeing lots of patients that came in with conditions that were affected by their weight. Because again, let's clarify, not every condition is affected by weight, and not every condition will improve when weight changes, but there are 100% some conditions that do. For example, type 2 diabetes. The main reason for the development of type 2 diabetes is visceral fat. I'm not going to pretend that that's not the case, just because as doctors and as a society, we fucked up so much in regards to fat phobia and discriminating against fat people. Those two things can be there at the same time. Yes, we have discriminated against fat people, and we are overly afraid of people of having fat, but at the same time, fat does have some consequences on our body. So I was seeing patients that came in with conditions that I knew would improve if they lost weight. And I personally didn't feel like I could do my job as a doctor properly. I felt like, and I still feel, that my job as a doctor is to talk to people holistically and looking at their whole lifestyle in regards to their health. And weight is a part of lifestyle. If, for example, you have arthritis in your knees, being at a heavier weight will cause those symptoms of arthritis to be worse. Now, again, it's a longer conversation as to whether or not losing weight is actually overall a good idea to someone's health. But I still felt like I couldn't talk to people about this kind of stuff. I felt that even if I was going to have nuanced conversations or reasonable conversations, I couldn't. So I decided at that point that I needed to lose weight, rightly or wrongly, to be a better doctor. And for me, that was the first time in my life I felt like I wanted to lose weight for a different reason. Usually the reason was that I felt like I wasn't attractive, or I felt like I didn't, it was mainly the attractive thing, let's be honest. I always felt less of a person because I saw myself as being at a higher weight than most other people. So yeah, that was when I first started this stuff. And along the way, I've become very interested. I've done a lot of my own research in regards to looking at health and nutrition and why we're believing what we're told on a daily basis. And, when I first started trying to lose weight, I cut out all carbs, for example. Why did I do that? It's not scientific. It's not necessary. It doesn't improve your relationship with food. And it was that really got me interested in why am I doing this stuff? Is there a better way? And it developed into learning around some of the concepts of health at every size and looking at why we think certain things that we do about health and weight and why we're so dogmatic about it. I could talk about that for quite a while, and I'm sure that those kind of questions will come up again. I find it relatively difficult to actually talk about that kind of stuff because I have a very different opinion about health and weight now than I did 3-4 years ago. But we're not meant to hide our past, we're just meant to explain it, I guess. Is that right? Anyway, second point, do you have any tips for kicking less useful health and nutritional habits? This is from Bella. When I was 17, I went to a nutritionist who put me on an 800 calorie a day diet. I was on that diet for quite a while until my doctor pulled me off it. Ever since, I've continued to struggle with calorie counting in my head and other bad habits she taught me. How do I kick them for good? It's not an easy question. I'll try, but that's not an easy question. And I think the main thing to realize is that this kind of stuff takes time. This isn't going to be something that you can change overnight, and you're not going to suddenly forget all of these habits and suddenly just be free of all of them. It doesn't quite work like that. It's a process. And there are certain steps that we can go through on that process. First off, I would just like to apologize on behalf of kind of healthcare in general, that you were put on an 800 calorie a day diet. I personally, unless someone's relationship with food is amazing, I think that there are a lot of negative consequences to putting somebody on those kind of diets. Very, very calorie restrictive. I'm not a fan. I know that some people have success with them, but I'm not. And I can see by your question that you didn't get on with it. And that it's led to you now having a worse relationship with food than probably before you started. So that aside, how do we kind of move on? My personal opinion is that the principles of intuitive eating are incredibly helpful for improving our relationship with food. Some of the basic things to start with include giving yourself unconditional permission to eat all food. And that comes with it removing those labels of good and bad food, removing the labels of healthy and unhealthy. That means that we put certain foods in certain boxes. To clarify, there are some foods that are going to be healthier for us to eat in larger quantities. I'm not pretending that there aren't. If we ate donuts every single day for the rest of our lives, if we ate 10 donuts every day, it probably wouldn't be good from a nutritional standpoint. But if you are refusing to let yourself eat donuts because they are bad for you, and therefore that kind of restriction comes from a place of fear, I would argue until the cows come home, that your overall impact, the overall impact on your health from doing that is going to be a negative one, not a positive one. So having unconditional permission to eat all foods is a good place to start, 100%. The second thing I would say, and probably the last thing, because otherwise we could just go through all of the principles of intuitive eating, and I would encourage you to go and look some of that kind of stuff up, would be rejecting diet culture. And rejecting the good or bad labels kind of comes with that, but at the same time, it's rejecting some of the narrative that things like, for example, if it has high protein in it, it's healthier for you, therefore we must pick the high protein option. If it has a lot of calories in it, although again, where's the limit with what a lot of calories is, it's also bad for us, and we should always be picking the low calorie option. Some of that stuff just really isn't helpful. And so I know that you have in your head a lot of kind of calorie counting memories and a lot of stuff there, but I think one of the best things for you is going to be trying to leave some of that stuff behind, trying to find other reasons for why you enjoy food and why you're picking food. Try and focus on taste, try and focus on how it makes you feel. Try and remove the calorie content from the forefront of your mind. I know it's not easy. One step at a time, all right? I feel like I haven't really answered that question very well, but it's really not an easy one to answer. Sorry. Third question. What are your thoughts? This is from Meg. What are your thoughts on wearable fitness trackers? Effective or a way for the diet industry to make us obsess over steps/activity? I think that we need to clarify the difference between something being problematic and something being inherently bad. Now, I personally have an Apple Watch. I sometimes look at how many steps I've done that day. It will sometimes complete circles for me if I've like stood up enough during the day or done enough exercise for the day. And it depends what you're using it for. Let's say that you have a goal of 10,000 steps a day. Why do you have that goal? Is that goal there because you think that if you don't do 10,000 steps, you can't eat as much food as if you did? Or do you know that movement is good for our health? And so having a kind of a goal, even if it's arbitrary, is a helpful way of encouraging us to exercise and move around. And so I think that if you understand what I'm saying, I think that's going to be the most important factor here, is what are you using them for? In regards to whether they're accurate, no, they're not accurate at all. And I would actively advise ignoring the whole calorie stuff around fitness trackers, because they're not accurate. The only thing that they're accurate at is comparing kind of one exercise to another and seeing if you kind of used more energy in one exercise compared to the other one. But the actual number is rubbish. It doesn't help us. So use them as an encouragement to exercise, because exercise is great. Let's see, what's the next one? Mariana, any advice on what to say to challenge fatphobic doctors, the kind that tell you to lose weight when you go in for a broken nose? Not everyone can just get up and find a new doctor that easily, and I don't want that doctor to do the same with someone else. That one is a very difficult question, but actually it's something that I spoke to with Kenzie Brenner the other day on a recording for her new podcast. It's not out yet, but when it is out, I would recommend that you definitely take a listen to it, because I think I discussed it quite well in that situation. But we spent quite a lot of time talking about that, and actually it's very difficult. The reason it's difficult is because as doctors, we are trying to improve your health. We are not trying, our intentions are good, even if our methods are flawed. So I can't justify doctors specifically telling people to lose weight when they come in with a broken nose, for example. And I'm sure that kind of stuff does happen. But at the same time, it's a public health incentive, right? It's just like smoking. If there are certain tick boxes, there are certain checks that every time you go to the doctor, or there are in the UK anyway, certain checks that they will ask. For example, do you smoke? Do you drink? And then looking at your BMI, your weight and your height. Now, you know my opinions on BMI, and if you don't, there's a story highlight on my Instagram, and go and have a look at it. BMI is not particularly helpful, but it's something that gets used. What I would say is, if you go to your doctor with an attitude of you're wrong, you're not helping me, how dare you say this, that doctor's back is going to be up, rightly or wrongly, okay? And you're probably right with some of this stuff. When you go and they tell you you need to lose weight and it's got nothing to do with why you came in, I get it. But at the same time, when they're seeing that as a health risk, just like smoking, if you go for something that's not to do with smoking and they mention smoking cessation, they're doing, in public health size, the right thing. So I would just please understand where this kind of stuff comes from. Understand that some of this is changing. Have some compassion for them. They are trying to help. I have compassion for Josh of 4 years ago, who thought that weight was always relevant for health. And I would ask that you have the same compassion as well. It's difficult. I know it's difficult, and there isn't a right answer to this. Doctors will say stupid things sometimes. Their intentions are good. Please focus on what their intentions are, and know that having a conversation with them is going to be better than having an argument with them. And so asking them whether your weight is relevant for your broken nose, for example, rather than telling them off for mentioning it, is perhaps a better conversation to start having. But this stuff is going to take time. And I know that it was very difficult for me when I first started looking at this kind of stuff to understand why it was a problem. I was like, no, but I'm trying to help people's health. So we need to be focusing on weight. And it wasn't from a place of it wasn't from a place of wanting to do harm. It was from a place of wanting to do good. I don't know. Sorry. Let's look at the next one. Just quickly, someone asked on the YouTube chat, a good book for intuitive eating. Personally, I would say that a very good book at the moment is Laura Thomas's book, Just Eat It. I'm partway through it myself. I think it's very good. I think that the original intuitive eating book is okay. Don't want to get myself in trouble for saying that, but it's okay. There are some parts of it that aren't great from a scientific perspective, but again, it's written a while ago. The more recently things are going to be written, usually the better. So give Laura Thomas's book a go. It's not bad at all. Although I haven't got through all of it, and I will point out some stuff if I don't agree with it, because, non-discriminate criticism, that's what we should be aiming for, James Smith. So, question from Monique. Hormones. There's a lot of buzz at the moment about hormone health, especially estrogen dominance. Can you comment on this? What's the science saying? Should we all be as wary of things like Teflon and non-organic beauty care products as the media would have us believe? Short answer, no. If you are concerned that you might have hormone imbalances, I would first off kind of see where those concerns are coming from. Are those concerns coming from fear-mongering on the internet, such as things about Teflon and using a microwave and using non-natural deodorants, for example? There is a difference between mechanism and reality. So, and there is a difference between correlation and causation. 99% of the time, hormones are not what we should be focusing on unless we have specific conditions such as polycystic ovary syndrome, unless we actually have some condition like diabetes, and we therefore want to be looking at what our insulin is doing. Otherwise, no. There's a lot of fear, and think back 30 years ago. Were we focusing on hormones? No. We're not suddenly more hormone dependent now than we were 30 years ago. So some of this stuff is difficult to explain why, but you're gonna have to trust me. But this stuff, we don't need to be looking at it in as much of an extent as the internet would have us believe. Obviously, there are always going to be cases. There are always going to be exceptions to the rule. But we can't live our life assuming that we're the exception to the rule. I like that. I'm going to write that one down because that might become an Instagram post at some point. Can't live our lives assuming we're the exception to the rule. This is how my Instagram gets made, by the way. I say things and then I'm like, that would be good. Let's see. Let's look at the next one. From Madalena. Hello. I have been vegetarian for 6 years and vegan for 3. Now I'm eating everything for the last 3 years. Especially during my vegan period, food became a fixation for me. I was obsessively meal prepping, thinking about what I could eat in restaurants and not enjoying time spent with friends. It was a very stressful time, and when I experienced the low moment psychologically, I turned to food as comfort and returned to eat everything. Now I'm working towards a more balanced relationship with food, good. But rather than being too much in the dieting culture, my problem is the opposite. Often I think as food is the only thing that gives me joy. How to exit from this mentality? Thank you very much. I've brought this upon myself, haven't I? These are not easy questions, but that's okay. First off, food is allowed to bring you joy. Like, food is great. For example, chocolate tastes amazing. It makes you feel good. That's okay. We don't need to deny the feelings that we have when we eat certain foods. It's a good thing, and one of the principles of intuitive eating is focusing on how food makes you feel, and that is a good thing. However, I get the question, and the question is, how do we stop food being the only thing that gives us joy? That's more of a kind of a psychology question, this one, and my gut feeling, if you were a friend that was coming to ask me about, is find some other things in your life that give you joy as well. There must be other things. Your friends, family, certain books, certain activities, certain types of exercise, maybe. I know that for me, playing music gives me joy. I love writing music. I haven't in a while, but I love doing that kind of stuff, and that stuff really does give me joy. So even though food for me gives me joy, it's not the only thing in my life that gives me joy. So careful not to go too much the other way, where you're afraid of food being the only thing that gives you joy, that you try and remove the joy from food, because that's not a good thing either. Food should be exciting. Food should have joy. And it sounds like you're on a better side of your relationship with food than you used to be. And so I would just encourage you to keep going. This stuff is a process. This isn't, again, it's not overnight. It's going to take time. So keep going. Find some other things that give you joy. And remind yourself of those things too. As I'm saying this, I do perhaps think that part of that question is also, how do we not only use food when we're feeling down? And I guess my answer to that would be that it's important to recognize what food actually does for us. If we're feeling depressed or down and we eat food and it makes us feel better, it's almost always only a temporary thing. Now, it's not automatically a bad thing, but if we only ever use food to make ourselves feel better, we're not really addressing the root of the problem. Now, that would then require perhaps going to go and see someone that can help you with that kind of stuff from maybe a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint, someone that's more experienced than I am in that kind of stuff. But yeah, I hope that helps, maybe. All right, let's go on to the next one. Mandy Burnett, what are your thoughts about the low FODMAP diet for IBS? Well, I think that it can be helpful. The difficulty is that obviously it's kind of an elimination diet, right? So it is in itself a little bit restrictive, but we're talking about restriction for symptomatic relief. IBS is difficult because irritable bowel syndrome is a diagnosis of exclusion. And what I mean by that is that there isn't anything that has been found that is wrong with your gut per se. So the symptoms that you're experiencing can't be explained by a certain thing. We can't say that there's too much inflammation here, or that you are allergic to this or that, or there isn't really a definitive medical answer. So sometimes people will find that doing an elimination diet or doing a low FODMAP diet can be helpful for their symptoms. And I would say that symptomatic relief is probably one of the few reasons why restriction might be acceptable. So, for example, if you are intolerant to dairy, then restricting dairy in your diet will make you feel better, and so probably okay. Okay, next question. Megan, what's a good approach to questioning content that somebody posts about exercise and nutrition? How can you politely question where they obtained information without coming off as rude? It's pretty common for people to share memes and type and content they read online without realizing the harm they're doing. I agree. If I knew that answer, I wouldn't be blocked by so many people on Instagram, unfortunately. I think it's going to depend on the person themselves. And sometimes we have to realize that when we're challenging this stuff, we're not necessarily challenging it to change their mind. Sometimes we're challenging it to give an alternative option to the people that are reading what they're posting. So if someone posts something about milk containing hormones and therefore being bad for you, if you post something, we can call it a rebuttal, but if you post something politely, politeness is a good place to start. Politely telling them or just mentioning that actually the science doesn't agree with that, that's going to be more helpful for the people that are watching that conversation than the person that posted about dairy in the first place. So perhaps focus on giving the alternative view to others rather than changing the mind of the person that posted originally. Sometimes you will also change the mind of that person, that's great. But perhaps remove that as being your primary goal when you challenge this kind of stuff. Okay, next question. Laurie, thoughts on eating more healthy fats whilst training for a big endurance event, aka Ironman? Does adding in healthy fats help you burn more fat? So to address that last thing, adding healthy fats doesn't... Do you mean burn more fat from your body or burn more fat for energy whilst running? Because that's difficult. All energy that we ingest is most energy that we ingest is going to be easily available for our body to use for energy. There are going to be some foods that our body prefers to use for energy than others, and that's also going to depend on the person. I think it's sensible. I think it's probably always going to be a sensible idea to be having healthier fats rather than unhealthier fats. So, for example, more polyunsaturated fats rather than saturated fats, without being afraid of either of them, to clarify. So yeah, I would probably agree that increasing your kind of, if you're including lots of fat in your diet because it's calorie dense and you need those calories for the energy of the Ironman, for the running and the cycling and the swimming, you mental person, then if you're making sure you're intaking lots and lots of calories, trying to pick the best sources for those calories to come from is a good idea. Definitely, for sure. Whether or not it officially makes your body more efficient at burning them, I'm not sure, but I'll see if I can find out. But is it a good idea in general? Yeah. Let's see, next question. Wendy, what are your thoughts on Dr. Robert Morse, if you know of him? He's on YouTube as well. He teaches raw veganism. I became so sick, stuck in the spiritual cult. I personally don't know. I have never seen any of Dr. Robert Morse's stuff. However, sometimes in life you can make a judgment about stuff. And you've told me that he's a raw vegan. Now, being a raw vegan, and he promotes raw veganism. Now, being a raw vegan is one of the most restrictive eating habits or restrictive diets on the planet. It isn't inherently healthier than not being a raw vegan. And so there is no benefit to putting yourself under that much restriction. We have to weigh up benefit and risk, right? There is always going to be an element of, moderation is restriction. So there's always going to be an element of restriction in your life and in your diet. But we need to weigh up the benefits. Being raw vegan, only eating vegan food that comes out the ground, and it's incredibly restrictive. And the risks of that restriction, worsening your relationship with food, leading to disordered eating behaviors like orthorexia, and even things such as anorexia, is not worth the risk. And so my opinion of him is that he's promoting a diet that is incredibly restrictive and has incredible potential for harm. Next question. Laura, what's the best evidence-based way to reduce visceral fat? I have a long history of eating disorders, and anything resembling a diet sends me straight down the rabbit hole. I can handle adding things, in brackets, eat more veggies, get more cardio, eat more olive oil, etc. But taking things away, no fried foods, no sugar, etc., instantly puts me back in that eating disordered mindset. Maybe after more time of recovery, I'll be able to diet and lose my excess weight, but that time isn't now. So there's a lot of things to touch on that one. I think number one, let's start on why would we want to reduce visceral fat? And I agree that from a health perspective, from a physical health perspective, reducing visceral fat is a good thing. We know that visceral fat or a large amount of visceral fat is one of the greatest contributors to the development of metabolic syndrome, to the development of type 2 diabetes, and to the development of cardiovascular disease. So let's just start off by saying that, yes, reducing visceral fat is a good thing. And it is something that we should be aiming for from a longevity perspective. If we want to live as long as we can, then we should be aiming for that. Now, I completely agree with what you're saying, and it sounds like you're being very sensible about this, and it is very important to recognize our own risks and limitations when it comes to changing our diet for health reasons. So just like, for example, being raw vegan can be incredibly harmful, starting to cut things out of our diet, so less fried foods, for example, even though they might be actually relatively sensible health suggestions, if by doing that, as you said, it could send you down the rabbit hole and lead to more restrictive eating behaviors, and with somebody with a history of eating disorders, I think it's very sensible to be focusing on including more things rather than removing. So I commend you on that, and I think that's a great idea to be doing at the moment. And actually, I think that more people should do things like that. Now, one of the best ways of reducing visceral fat is exercise. Not specifically cardio, not specifically weight training, but just regular exercise in general. So I would advise that that finding some exercise that you enjoy and doing it regularly, trying to get 5 periods of exercise in a week is going to be a great thing, and that's going to be a great thing for your health. And one of the reasons why it's a great thing for your health will be its impact on visceral fat. The second thing is going to be stress and sleep. And these are things that we can focus on that don't necessarily don't ruin our relationship with food. Stress, ironically, having high levels of stress will make us unhealthier. And there are lots of mechanisms why that is, but some of those mechanisms are to do with higher levels of cortisol, which is one of our hormones that is circulating and gets released when we are in periods of stress. And that hormone is elevated chronically. So if we are chronically stressed, it can have an impact on visceral fat. And so finding ways of reducing stress, be that through kind of meditation, be that through mindfulness, be that through focusing on adding things rather than removing things from your diet, because actually removing things from your diet can be quite stressful. So I agree, that kind of stuff is great. And so, yeah, finding ways to reduce stress in your life on a regular basis is I know that's very easier said than done, but it's a great thing to be doing if you can. Finally, I would say that if we look at the negative health impacts of visceral fat, let's look at this from a different way around. Instead of looking at what we can do to reduce visceral fat, let's look on what we can do to mitigate the risks of having visceral fat. So if we look at things like metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, that's to do with insulin resistance, right? And then if we look at things like cardiovascular disease, that's often related to kind of cholesterol levels. Now, both of those things can be improved through increasing fiber in our diet. So I cannot stress enough how important fiber is, and I personally do not get enough, and I want to. I want to get more, but increasing fiber in our diet is so healthy for us. It's so good. It doesn't require cutting anything out. Just increasing fiber, increasing the amount of vegetables. It's often why people find themselves getting healthier when they go on a vegan diet. It's not because they've cut meat out, but it's because they've increased their vegetables and their fiber, and it's so good for us. We can go into the mechanisms of fiber later, but essentially, fiber is great. Fiber will help our insulin resistance, and fiber will also help our cholesterol. So increase fiber in your diet. Do it. Just find ways of improving your fiber intake. I hope that's helpful. Okay, let's go for next one from Monique. Exercise. Can you talk about the role regular exercise plays in intuitive eating and in repairing a relationship with food? So I've touched on exercise already, but I wouldn't say that exercise necessarily has a direct role on repairing a relationship with food. But I would say that it's just important to make sure that we're not exercising for the wrong reasons. Because even if we start exercising because we think that we need to earn our food, the health benefits of exercising are probably going to be cancelled out by the stress of trying to earn our food and the negative impact on our relationship with food that doing something like that has. So get more exercise for health. Exercise is great. Don't let weight loss and earning your food be the only reason that you exercise. I hope that makes sense. We've got a few more on here. Brianne, do you have any advice on how to handle cravings / excessive eating during menstruation? Some months is fine, I'll eat more food, but it's fruits and vegetables. Other months, the most recent ones, I'm eating chocolate and Twizzlers. I haven't had a Twizzler in a while. Normally, having one of those things a week wouldn't bother me, but it's the Twizzlers and chocolate in the same day, and then I continue to eat chocolate every day for the rest of the week, and probably other sugary items that I just don't remember. It feels like the 3 weeks of the month I can eat relatively well, and then that fourth week just destroys it all. I'm not against chocolate and Twizzlers, good. I'm against the excess during that time. Fine. We all know that moderation is good, right? But the better our relationship with food becomes, the easier moderation is. Now, there are two things here. One is that there are going to be times of the month where your body, as a woman, where your body wants to put more fat on as a preparation for kind of what's to come, for ovulation and for the potential for being pregnant, all those kind of things. I'm not going to get into the whole menstrual cycle at the moment, but just be aware that as a woman, you have fluctuations in terms of your hunger, you have fluctuations in terms of what your body wants, and that's okay. Number two, if there are certain times of the month where you feel that you are craving certain types of foods more than others, I'm okay with that. That's fine. What I would say is that if those foods are as normal for you as possible, then those cravings won't last as long. So, for example, if chocolate and Twizzlers don't hold any power over you in regards to fear, and I know you said you're not against chocolate and Twizzlers, but be honest with yourself about how you feel, because when you have too many of them, you are afraid of that. It's a fear, and and that fear is linked with guilt, and I understand that because I work through the same stuff. Okay, so I'm not trying to call you out here. I'm just saying, have a think about where that's coming from. It's if our relationship with those types of foods are as good as possible, then they lose their power. So when we fancy them and when we're craving them, that's fine. But they lose their power in regards to us continuing to eat them and continuing to binge on them, for example. It means it will be much easier for us to have them in moderation and not want them for the whole week, for example. If you are very, very sparse on chocolate and Twizzlers for 3 weeks of the month, that becomes in itself a bit of a restriction, unless it's purely because you don't fancy them. But if you have them in the house and you like the look of them, you're like, oh, I'd like some chocolate today, and you go, oh no, actually I won't because it's not good for me. It's difficult, but that in and of itself will then contribute to when you give in, let's say, when you are craving it and you have some, that will contribute to you then having lots of it. So that's just something to think about, I guess. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to message me and we can kind of chat about that a bit further if need be. Meg, what are your thoughts on BCAAs or other pre-workout fuel products? What do you use pre/post workouts? I feel you may have mentioned BCAAs before, but I can't remember. I mentioned that a long time ago. So for people that don't necessarily know, BCAAs are branched chain amino acids. Essentially, they're the building blocks of protein, and they are often touted as something that's essential for muscle growth if you're lifting weights at the gym, for example. Now, to clarify, if you have a diet if you eat meat, so you have a diet that's relatively high or even just moderate in animal protein, you almost definitely don't need you 100% don't need BCAAs. There are going to be certain situations, for example, if you're a bodybuilder or or an elite sportsman, where there may be some tiny optimization from having them that is beneficial. Tiny, all right? But I'm talking about people that go to the gym twice a day, who are trying to build as much muscle as possible, and having that extra, half a centimeter of muscle around their arm, for example, is going to actually kind of be beneficial for them. But for you and I, kind of pointless. We get enough protein and enough variety of amino acids from our diet that BCAAs aren't going to give us any noticeable difference. And so I would say a waste of money. Now, they're not necessarily going to cause you any harm either. So if you like how they taste and they psychologically give you a boost in regards to strength when you go to the gym, then fine. But it's up to you to work out whether or not they're worth the money for you. Now, pre-workout, essentially, pre-workout doesn't need to be anything fancy. You just need something that's going to give you some energy. And different people are going to find different things. Some people may find that that carbohydrates before a workout actually gives them more energy for the workout itself. That's not a bad thing. Personally, I think caffeine is great if you are okay with caffeine and you're not necessarily working out late at night, because caffeine late at night can affect our sleep. And I've already mentioned sleep is important. So caffeine can be a great thing. And I will often have a coffee before going to the gym because it can improve our energy levels. And actually, that's probably as complicated as you need to get. Find something that works for you. If you're hungry after a workout and because you use a lot of energy, eat some food and eat a balanced meal, just like we should always be eating balanced meals, right? So something with protein, fats, and carbs in it. It's great. We may want to have more carbs after a workout because it can help our muscle recovery, but not because carbs are unhealthy, okay? Just to clarify. All right, I hope that's helpful. Let's see, we'll go with one last question and then I'll probably sign out, to be honest. So Loretta, hello. So I want to be able to stick 2 fingers up at the diet culture, but I've put on a lot of weight in the last year. I know calories in versus out is the only way, but without diet culture, I have no idea how to lose weight. I feel like it's impossible. Now, this is one of the issues that I sometimes have with, sorry, touched her mouth, I shouldn't have touched her mouth. This is one of the issues that I sometimes have with people that are anti-diet culture. I think that sometimes they negate the fact that for some people, weight loss might actually be helpful and might improve their health. Now, Loretta, I don't know with you because I can't necessarily make that judgment call over the internet. But what I can say is I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't lose weight. What I am here to say is that any method of weight loss, as you've rightly said, has with it elements of diet culture and hence has with it elements of being problematic for your health and problematic for your relationship with food. The better our relationship with food becomes, the less problematic those methods are. They never become 100% fine, but they become less problematic. And the less problematic we can make them, the better, right? Because if we do need to lose weight for health, which is sometimes a thing, we need to be doing it the least problematic way possible. So my advice to you would be to spend some time focusing on your relationship with food. Put the weight loss to one side because you can come back to it. It's okay. Spend time actively focusing on your relationship with food. It sounds like you know what diet culture is, so spend time actively challenging diet culture, actively challenging some of those things. Spend time giving yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods. No food is off limit. Spend time focusing on honoring your hunger, eating when you're hungry, and respecting your fullness. And those 2 things, that they sound wishy-washy, but they are amazingly helpful and amazingly important. Spend time learning to love exercise, irrelevant of your weight. Just exercise in general for your overall health. Exercise is great. Spend time focusing on your relationship with food and put the weight loss to one side. That would be my kind of number 1 advice for you. So I hope that's helpful. I'm going to leave it there. I think that actually, as much as that wasn't necessarily a successful live stream, I would say that that was quite a successful video answering a whole bunch of your questions. And I hope that you found some of it helpful. I will try and link to some of the time periods in the video in the description and on Patreon so that you can kind of skip forward to stuff if you wanted to hear me talk about it in more detail. What I would say is thank you for being part of the Patreon in the first place. I think it's cool, and I'm excited to see kind of how this progresses. A small heads up, when my exam is done next Friday, this Friday, I will be starting a podcast. It's quite exciting, with someone else. We'll be doing it as like a duo, and I think that'll be really cool. So just a little kind of bit of early information for you. Yeah, I'm excited about that. And then lastly, I would just say I do have some slots available for people who want to start working on their relationship with food in a more kind of one-to-one basis. I do have some slots on my Patreon in regards to Skype. So if you feel like you would benefit from having a half an hour or an hour chat with me, just one-to-one over Skype, where we can talk about your relationship with food, where you're currently at, some ideas that I might have for you kind of moving forwards and what might benefit you, then do feel free to explore that, because I'd love to work with some of you a bit closer. But for now, that's everything. She got a bit grumpy at the end there, sorry about that. But you've had the cat in the frame the whole time, so you're welcome. Have a good rest of your Sunday, and I will speak to you later.